Welcome to another episode of Brand Lincoln, where we take a look around the Lincoln, Nebraska area and introduce you to business owners and influential people in the city. We are brought to you by Perch Merch. Perch Merch is a locally owned, custom screen printing and embroidery apparel shop that also specializes in vehicle wraps, decals, and all sorts of promotional products. If your business, school, or team is looking to expand your brand, head to perch-merch.com or call us at 402-217-5212.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Brand Lincoln. I am your host, Chris Beecham, joined by my co-host, Henry Schmidt.
Hello, Chris.
And producer, DJ extraordinaire, Dude Man.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Hello.
Before we introduce our guest, we would just like everybody to please like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Brand Lincoln Podcast. So today in the Perch Merch studio, we have James Bowers, Councilman James Bowers from the Northeast District in Lincoln.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Was that legit?
Yeah, no, that sounds about as legit as I am, which is kind of shaky sometimes. So.
That's what we look for in a city council. So born and raised in Lincoln. How did you get into how does one become a city councilman? Let's start with how you became, or were you always big into this stuff since childhood? Tell us about James.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a very, very quick story, and then I'll tell you kind of like a follow-up to that. So grew up, went to school to become a social worker, right? And I was working for a child welfare organization when the state tried to privatize child welfare. Long story short, it was this disaster. It was one of the worst things that had ever happened to the child welfare system in the state of Nebraska. And the organization that I was working for, a lot of our colleagues really took the lead in trying to raise awareness about it and get the state to act on it. So I'm on the steps of the Capitol, and I'm with some other social workers and therapists, and there were some elected officials that had shown up, and we were just so upset about the failures of the child welfare system, parents that were going without seeing their kids that were going without services, foster parents weren't getting paid, and people were losing their jobs because these agencies were going bankrupt overnight. And something clicked in my brain at that point, and it was, instead of yelling at these people, or instead of trying to convince them or see the experiences that I've gone through, why don't I just become one of them? And so that really led me into how to get involved in policy and eventually running for office.
Where were you at in your life at? Is this mid-20s, early 30s?
I was 21, and so I was pretty early on in my career, 21, 22. And it was a horrible situation, but I am kind of glad that I had went through that early on in my career, because it allowed me to get involved in policy work and kind of understanding how decisions are made early on. And that's really kind of been a core tenet of my work as a social worker, in bringing people with lived experience and people who have gone through some of the failures that our government has created to the table, and letting policymakers hear from them directly.
So when you were basically protesting.
Yeah, it was, we did a rally, and then we did a bunch of press releases. We did a media tour, and it was the governor was on the other side of the street. I remember that. And then we had some state senators that had shown up, and it was essentially a bunch of social workers saying something needs to happen and something needs to change because this is not working. And I think because of that experience, and because people were willing to speak out, it got the legislature and the governor to act. We still don't have a perfect child welfare system by any stretch of the imagination, but it did eventually lead to the state taking back child welfare and not privatizing out, except for one specific part of Nebraska. But it really led to some changes being happening, and some people to understand the impacts that this policy decision to privatize child welfare had on people that were most vulnerable.
So then that led into running for office.
Yeah. So
how does one run?
The next morning, you're like, okay, I'm running.
No. Good question. So the longer story with that is, So I was like 21, 22 at the time. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to run for the legislature. And that was in 2012, 2013. And I was 24, maybe 25 at the time. I was not very connected politically. I, was an angry, upset social worker that wanted to make a change in our child welfare system. And I lost that election and got through the primary, made it to the general, but did not win the general election. And I just stayed involved, right? Like, even though I had not gotten elected, did not mean that I was going to like take my ball and go home, right? Like, I still had a message that I wanted to send out. There were still changes that I wanted to see happen. So that was in 2014 was when that election happened. And then there was a city council election coming up for 2019. So in about 2018, people were approaching me, asking me to run for city council. And originally I had declined and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to, I didn't feel like I was well prepared enough to run for city council. But then eventually, when no one else was stepping up, I'm like, okay, well, I cannot just abdicate, the neighborhood that I grew up in because no one else is stepping up. So I stepped up to run for city council and surprisingly got elected and then got reelected. And it really has been, it's been the biggest honor of my life.
So, okay, tell me what running was like. Like, you said you got elected. Were you like knocking on doors? Like, how does this work?
Yeah.
Like,
It's hard.
I don't know the first thing on what to do.
Besides yard signs, I'd be like, I know a place.
We
I can
could
make
do
my
that,
own
yeah.
yard signs. I
Right.
could go nuts. But then what? Like,
Yards,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure you got to get on a
mailers.
ballot.
campaigning is emotionally draining. It is physically draining. It's one of the hardest things that people will have to do. When I first got elected, I was like, everyone should run for office. It doesn't matter if you win or lose, just run. You know what I mean? Because if you have something to say and you have something to do, even if you lose, you can still get your message out there, right? And, if you campaign and you're strategic about it, then maybe you can get elected and then you have a seat at the table. But after campaigning, I've walked that back so that way people are very aware of what they're getting into. I mean, like, you ask everyone that you've ever met for money, because unfortunately money drives a lot of campaigns, and I'm working on my language, so if I pause a little bit, it's because I'm trying
cuss,
to.
so.
Okay, that's just what I need, a radio ad of me like on a tirade of it's a very humbling experience. And then you're really surprised by the people that reach out and say, like, I'm with you 100%. And then you're really surprised by people who you thought would be in your corner all the way, and then they're not. And it takes a lot of money to run for office. And you really have to start with your, what some folks would call like your Christmas card base, and use that to raise money to show viability. And those dollars then go towards being able to pay for, palm cards for when you go door knocking, because you can't just go knock on someone's door and say, please remember my name, right? Like, you got to like leave something behind. And it also goes towards mailers. And I mean, it goes into, there was an article that just came out in the Journal Star that said that these legislative races are crossing the $100,000 mark earlier on. There was one for the primary election where the candidate raised, don't quote me on this, but it was something like $180,000 and didn't even make it through the primary. And so you have to be able to raise money. And if you're unable to raise money, then unfortunately other people are less likely to donate money to, because then they don't view you as viable. So that's a really, really hard part of it. Then the other part of it is going door knocking. It can be physically taxing. It can be emotionally taxing. Because especially in, what year are we in, 2024? You go up to someone's door, and it's not like in the 70s where people are like, someone wants to.
I don't answer.
Ready to
Right,
agree.
right.
I look at my Ring camera and like,
Yeah.
who's it? Nah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Go away, Spectrum.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's not like
Calling
who's here
out Spectrum.
to
Come after me.
And, so people are sometimes, frustrated when you come and knock on their door. And then especially in this, polarized political time, people are really upset, if you want to talk about politics or, even to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And-
Tell me. Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably had some bad, grumpy people.
I did.
Who
but
want to debate about probably some stupid stuff.
Or it's all of a
just-
sudden your fault. that
yell at you.
Something's
even though you
wrong.
haven't even been elected yet,
Yeah.
right?
yes. I will say also that there have been some of the best moments of my life have come out of door knocking. One story that always really sticks out in my head. So my dad struggled with alcoholism his entire life, and he died when I was young, right? Well, I was door knocking, and this woman answered the door, and she was like, oh, you're a Bowers. Are you Mike Bowers' kid? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, my husband wants to talk to you. I'm like, oh, great. Like someone that my dad, yeah, someone that my dad got into a fight with or something. And
owes money
So
too.
owes money,
yeah. And this guy opens the door and he's like, I want to apologize to you. Well, he had owned a liquor store that my dad would buy alcohol from.
Wow.
Jeez.
And so like it was this really powerful moment, you know, and my dad was a grown man. He made his own decisions, you know what I mean? But to like have that interaction was like really powerful. And, you know, being able to hear these stories from other people also who had known my dad was something that I was not expecting going door to door. And that was something that I thought was really, really cool.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
But obviously, so all the door knocking, all that worked. So, okay, I'm trying to envision, like, you just see, like, what do they call those? Like, voting party type things. Do you have, like, tell me what it was like the night you got elected.
So in 2019, when I first got elected, I was the first wave of results came in at 8:00. One of my friends came in from North Carolina. One of my friends I went to college with, and I was really, really nervous because, you know, my city council district. I mean, it's not a super blue area. It's not a super red area. You know what I mean?
Anybody can win.
Yeah, anybody can win. Obviously, because I got elected.
That was not a dig.
Anyone can do it. And so, I mean, I was really nervous. I felt like this civic duty, right? Like to get this across the finish line because I really believed in our message. And, you know, this was really personal. I mean, when we look at some of the health data, some pockets in Northeast Lincoln, like life expectancy is 20 years shorter than in South compared to some of the South areas of town. And
That's interesting.
That
yeah.
is.
And when I look at, you know, my mother has some health issues and, you know, I'm like, it really pisses me off that like my mother has health issues. And in my mind, if we had lived somewhere else, would she had better health outcomes, right? And so what I'm saying is that, like, you know,
we can't just move there now and
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I'm proud of Havelock. I will live in Havelock probably for the rest of my life. But, you know, but these like systemic things that just cause people to have like lower life expectancy rates, you know, in certain areas of our town, like it was all just very personal. So I felt very, very passionate about like, you know, making sure that we got elected. And then I remember seeing the first wave of results come in and I was ahead by a lot. And I was in my friend's Jeep because we were like on the way there. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, like I think we're going to pull this off. And my seat it was a swing seat. And so my seat switched parties. And I just remember thinking that like, okay, I have hope that we now have the tools to do some things to put our city on a pretty good track and to really clarify what Northeast Lincoln values really mean and the things that we will vote for.
Okay. So what does being a council person actually consist of?
Yeah, so good question. The one other thing I want to say about election night is when I got reelected, I mean, I was like super sick and I gave my speech and I barely even remember what I said because like I had slept for like 20 hours because I mean, I was just like, oh man, I was not feeling too well. And so, but that still kind of came with this sense of responsibility of like, okay, people are not only believing in the vision that I have, but they believe in the work that I've done, right? Like, you know, with inclusive playgrounds and sidewalk cafes and trying to make, you know, Lincoln more accessible. And I think it just really reaffirmed that, you know, people like the direction that we're going. In terms of the day-to-day, so city council members, it's considered a part-time gig or part-time job. Right. Currently, the council shares a part-time receptionist or a receptionist that works less than 40 hours a week. And that's how it was during my first term. One of the things that I was able to get pushed through in the most recent budget was being able to provide more supports to city council members. So one of the concerns that I had was when I first got elected, I was the youngest one by like 30 years, right?
That's when I walked in and saw a young guy sitting here, I was like, are we sure we have the right guy? Because I hear city council and, you know, 70-year-old white guy.
I'm in my jean jacket and my sideburns and my, you know, hair that's barely put together. You know, it's hard to serve if you don't have a pension, if you have to have a job, and if you have family, you know, commitments. And so it's like structurally, this we are not setting people up like me and other people who have to have a full-time job, who have to have health insurance and have to take care of either their kids or their parents, because now we have a whole generation of people that are now responsible for taking care of their parents. We're not setting them up to be able to serve effectively. And I do not believe that the answer is then telling folks with real life experience, no, you shouldn't run, right? So we need to be able to change how that works. And the city council should not just be a department of the city. We are a branch of government, which means that we have a very real job in terms of providing accountability, checks and balances, following up with constituents, being able to push policy initiatives that can alter the trajectory of our city. And that opportunity should not just be available for folks that are older, wealthy, and retired and have kids out of the house and don't have to take care of their parents. And so, especially during that first term, and especially during COVID, I mean, so I was a school social worker during my first term. So I was in a school from 7:30 to 3:30, which made it really hard for me to be able to do the business of a city council member, because most city departments are there from like 8 to 4, right? Mm-hmm. And the city staff is great, right? This is not a dig towards the city staff, but just structurally, it was hard to do. That being said, I'm very proud of the fact that I had passed the most amount of ordinances and initiatives than any other council member. And I kept thinking, if we had the resources for people like me, how much more could have gotten done? Because we're the branch of government that's supposed to be closest to the people, right? I mean, there are 7 of us. We are elected either a district or at large. And we have to be able to have the tools to be able to do our job and not just serve as an advisory board, for the administration. And so structurally, what it boils down to is we have a council meeting once a week on Mondays, and there we go over resolution and ordinances, and I'll go into that in a second. Then we each all serve on specific committees, and I'll go into that in a second also. And then we also respond to constituents that follow up. So there's not like a typical day-to-day that, pops up because, we have to fit it in with, if our city wants to have a city council branch that's part-time, where folks have to, still maintain health insurance at an employer, then, we have to be able to accept those like limitations, right? So what I'm getting at is that there's not like really a typical day-to-day, but structurally there's the council meeting, which can really run anywhere from, an hour and a half to 10 hours. I mean, I've been at meetings sometimes that have started like at 3:00 and I think ended like at midnight, and so people get very passionate about an issue, right? And they have things that they want to say. And so, they'll come and they'll get, their issues heard. And at council meetings, we do a public debate, or we will vote on things that are in front of the city. And then we each serve on a committee. The committees that I serve on is a railroad transportation safety district. So essentially railroad crossings, because there's some like joint accountability there. Safe and Successful Kids, which is an interlocal between Lincoln Public Schools and the city of Lincoln. Then I also serve on the Board of Health, which provides, it's an advisory board for the health department. And I've served on that before I was a city council member. And then I also serve on the Joint Budget Committee, which supports human services through the city and the county through city and county funds, and which is a good mix for, my background as a social worker and a therapist.
I'm very quickly realizing I'm way underqualified for this conversation.
No, you are not. You are not. Here's the deal.
I'm thinking about running for city council now.
Here's the deal. So many people, especially younger people, feel like that they do not have the life experience or the skills or the knowledge in, how to run for office or, or even serving in office. Once you get in office, the city government doesn't start the day that you get elected, right? Like, I mean, there's a long history. And so there is precedent. There's people that they're able to provide information. And, you have to just be willing to ask questions, right? And I have served with, I wish I would have counted the number, but I've served with at least 7 other members of the city council that are not currently on there, right? So maybe 14 total. And I've seen a lot of candidates, right? And there's a varying level of understanding. No matter how well you think you understand how things work before you get elected, once you get elected, it is totally different, right? Like there's more detail, there's more nuance, right? And I think that's one of the most frustrating things about like campaigning is there's a lot of nuances with a lot of policy decisions and with a lot of reasons why things exist, right? And just if you feel like that you are called to run, investigate it, learn all you can about the office, you know what I mean? And be involved and whatnot, but people should not feel like that they are unqualified. I mean, we have citizens get elected, right? That is the system that we have, and it should not be locked out for people who only have college degrees, or like I said, people who are independently wealthy and are in their 60s and 70s. So we need a younger voice, and we need a voice that is reflective of Lincoln. And that's true of all, governments across the nation.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if you said, how long have you been a council member then?
I am in my 6th year.
Okay.
Which blows my mind to think. You know what I mean? It feels like just yesterday. But outside of Benny Shobe, who's running for re-election right now, who's amazing, I'm the longest serving council member. And
oh, wow.
There's pros and cons to having a really young council. And I mean young council, I don't mean like in terms of like people who serve age, but like how long they have served. And I think that's one of the things that Benny brings, and why I hope he's successful in his reelection, because he's what I call like the quiet collaborator, right? He never embarrasses anyone in public, never tries to get into these like little digs at people. You know what I mean? He asks questions for the public, and with him being the longest serving council member, he needs to get reelected, and I look forward to helping him get reelected. Benny Shobe.
Good luck.
So does everybody get along for the most part?
I was going to ask that too, because in 8 hours you surely have some disagreements, correct?
Well, yeah,
Let the listeners know there was a slight eye roll.
I respect everyone who is willing to serve. Our values may differ, our philosophies may differ, and sometimes things can be pretty high stakes, which you can really tell a lot about a person when things are, pretty intense.
Sorry, I'm thinking of every time it's gotten intense here at the shop. And, I think my colors shine during those times.
I think it's good to have personality differences on an elected board, right? So that way, policy that comes forward has gone through a process, right? It's been proven. So Richard McGinnis, who I served with during my first term, he was of the opposite party of me, and I love that man. He was amazing. He was a great mentor. I really respect him. And he was often the first person that I would call if I wanted to introduce something. I'm like, okay, I know that you may not see this issue in the same way that I see it, but let me run this through you so that way I can come up with a really good policy that I know will be, well suited for the people of Lincoln, and, be able to earn his support. And I think that that's a really good way to do business, is finding people that you can trust. And I think trust is really the most important thing, right? Like, if you can trust someone, then you can have a vulnerable conversation with them. And if you can have a vulnerable conversation with them, you can be like, okay, here's everything that I know. Like, let's just cut the bullshit. Here's everything that I know. Here's what I'm trying to do. How can we get from point A to point B? You know what I mean? And knowing that they're not going to then, use that against you later, or, try to embarrass you in public later, that's huge. And let me be very clear when I say there's a difference between trying to embarrass someone and to stand up for yourself, right? Those are two very, very different things. And I think people watching can kind of see, the difference between those things.
Okay. So what do you do when you still have another job? Are you still doing social work? Are you still? Yeah.
So I'm the executive director of NAMI Nebraska, and NAMI Nebraska stands for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. We have a Nebraska chapter, and NAMI provides support, education, advocacy for mental illness. And so we have support groups for individuals who are experiencing mental illness, and we have support groups for individuals who are loved ones of people with mental illness, kind of like A and Al-Anon, you know what I mean, for individuals who are struggling, and then family members of individuals who are struggling. And then we also have programs where we really teach individuals with mental illness, and we also teach family members, what does diagnosing mean? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you maintain in a crisis? What are the different options available for you? And we actually just got funding to where we're hopefully going to be bringing in some programming specifically for youth on how to talk about mental illness, how to be on the lookout for warning signs of suicide, and how to also provide educators and parents with the tools to be able to talk to their kids about mental illness. And then I also have a small private practice that I see some folks with for, just to kind of keep my clinical skills fresh.
Oh, great program though, yeah.
No, so I got hired on about a year ago, and the growth has been enormous. And I think, people all the time have been like, oh my gosh, congratulations, good job. I'm like, it's really not a reflection of me. I think it's a reflection of the fact that Nebraskans, want to see a change with mental health and mental illness.
what's really coming in the spotlight in the last 10 years. Before that, it was, you didn't really talk about it.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
So that's good as well. So let's move to your oh shit moments. So
Like today, or I mean, like
whatever you want. As Joe
Signing up for
shows,
this
Joe always
podcast.
your life.
Joe likes to restrict when the oh shit moments have happened.
So we start with the bad. Like, what was a moment in your political career that you were like, oh shit, I'm done? Like, I don't know if you've had any bad confrontations where you just wanted to just say, forget it, I'm out.
COVID really shaped how I view our society. That was a very unique experience for everyone in our community, right? I mean, I think that changed how a lot of people view our society. But I think that, I mean, like we were getting death threats, right? And that was just such a wild time. And that really, but I never felt like giving up during the pandemic, right? Or, while we were in those stages of the pandemic. Someone said this once, and this really kind of rang true, so this wasn't my original thought, but I believe it. It was, when you take the oath of office, it's really like a marriage vow, right? For better or worse, like I'm sticking in there, you know what I mean? And that really, I thought, was a really strong way of looking, and I think really articulated how I felt about it. Like, I'm not going to abandon my post. I am not going to give up midway through. And it really kind of reinforced the fact that, like, I need to run for re-election because, there's still a lot of work to be done. And that I think was a really interesting experience.
Real quick on that. Let's go through that. I didn't even think about that sort of stuff. I remember
well, I really need to get my hair cut, Chris, and they were restricting me.
I remember everybody going after like the mayor and everything, but it just trickled down to everybody, didn't it?
It did. I got a letter in the mail one time from someone who said that they were going to like take me to like a military tribunal,
Was it like made out of different letters out of magazines and stuff?
Like a ransom letter?
I would have gotten that framed.
It was written in blood.
And I think even by that point, when I had gotten that one, and it was, I think specifically from like the Queen of Canada or something like that, which I think was part of this like QAnon thing. By that point, I'm just
Queen
like,
has your address?
Yeah, I know. It was by that one in particular. I'm just like, okay, whatever, But I mean, I think the individual I was most worried about was, my mother who has health conditions, and it's not like she can fight off an attacker, and that went through my mind a lot of, if someone snaps and then they show up at my house, and if I'm not there, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how I could live with myself. But that was always something that was kind of in the background of my mind. There was an attempted recall that was over it, and I remember the recall happening, and that even wasn't really an oh shit moment, but more of a, this is the right decision to make, and I'm going to stand by it. And
because I can't believe that people actually think like that's going to work.
Right. Right.
And you got that letter and you're like, shit, everybody, I changed my mind.
Right. The tribunal one. Yeah.
This made so much sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I got to stop, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Nice. That was just a really, unique. And I remember even like before the pandemic happened. So I got elected in like May of 2019. And I think, pandemic started really kicking off in like March of 2020. So even the things that I thought were big issues, those first couple of months, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that's small potatoes compared to this,
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to your good oh shit. What was
my what?
Your good oh shit.
Oh, okay.
I call it like the Jerry Maguire moment where you like get in your car and you're singing. Like maybe that first time when you got elected, like what was your like, oh my God, this is going to happen, or I'm doing this, I'm making a difference.
So like I said, especially my first term, and being able to pass the most amount of like initiatives and ordinances, was something that I was really proud of. A couple of things that I've been really proud of was being able to secure dollars to create Lincoln's first inclusive playground, and construction will start on that over in Mahoney Park. So I had some residents in Northeast Lincoln, Kathy Martinez and Brianna Olson, who really led the charge on this, reached out and said, we want to have a playground for, kids with disabilities that families can be able to take their kids to, right? Or even their grown children to, who may be having disabilities.
We do not have one here?
So
I thought Antelope Park
So
was one.
That one was, I can't remember what decade it was created in. The one that's going to be in Mahoney Park is like state of the art. So like even like slides that kids can go down, like if they have like a cochlear implant, it can create like static feedback. Like really,
Interesting.
yeah. So this is, really state of the art, updated technology, and it's going to be the first of its kind. And I'm so proud of this because even how it was designed was parents and folks with lived experience were the ones who were deciding how it would be planned with the help of like parks officials and saying like, okay, these are kind of your options. You know what I mean? How do you want to do zones? Like what kind of playground equipment do you want? And I think being able to bring that to Lincoln is going to be huge. And also there's going to be more accessible playground equipment going into all the parks now because of that, right? And so I think Kathy Martinez and Brianna Olson, who reached out and continue to lead the charge after that, even after the city chipped in funding to continue to secure even more dollars, have been real leaders on that. The other thing that I thought was really one of my huge wins most recently was being able to put in a plan to be able to get our sidewalks up to par, right? So in a lot of our older neighborhoods, our sidewalks are, really, messed up. And back in the 90s, property owners had voted to transfer maintenance of sidewalks to the city, right? And so we already took it on, with kind of a backlog, because it's not like everyone had pristine sidewalks and then decided to turn it over.
They're not giving you the best equipment from the start.
Right. Yeah. And so, I feel like I keep taking everything back to my mom, but like, I can't even take my mom in a walk around my neighborhood, because she's in a wheelchair. Cause there's inches of separation.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was a kid on my big wheel.
Yeah.
Like,
You're going off on the right.
You don't want to take that certain turn because you're going to hit that bump.
And so being able to get a plan put together to essentially put funding in. So over the next 6 years, it's like $18 million will be going into sidewalks, which is a huge jump from the previous like $250,000 or like $1 million in the past year or two. So I'm really proud of that because I think that really is going to make Lincoln more accessible. Another thing that I was really proud of was getting conversion therapy banned in Lincoln. So conversion therapy is where, if you are gay and then, a therapist tries to say that they're going to turn you straight and then they do all these like
scared straight type of thing.
Yeah.
That's still a thing.
Yeah, no. And I think that was one of the most surprising things when I brought this forward is a lot of people said, well, this is still happening. And then we had people that would come and provide public comment. And as a therapist myself, I've worked with individuals that were still experiencing this in our city and doing like really weird things, right? Like making, teens look at pornography, like straight pornography. And then,
oh my God.
It's like something out of a movie.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Chris.
Yeah. And so
this isn't the 80s.
Yeah.
No.
It was,
Jeez.
And it's still happening, it was still happening. And so being able to provide an avenue for individuals that have been victims of conversion therapy to hold practitioners that provide this accountable for using tools and tactics that have been discredited, that are not evidence-based, that go against the standard of care and that go against the scope of care, I think was a huge message of hope for individuals in the LGBT community.
Let's not make that a Netflix special for Lincoln because I can just see it. You know what I mean? Like all the people that were affected by that,
One little secret that I'll tell you about that is, I knew that there'd be questions, even if people were telling their stories, wondering like, oh, is this still happening here? So I went to this website that was a proponent and said that, that they had a bunch of contact information. So I emailed them and I came up with some like sounding email account, and I'm like, my son tells me he's gay, and I don't like that. Do you have anyone who can help us? And they sent me a list of therapists.
Like here's 5 recommended people to check out.
They're like, here you go,
and
I'm
and
like,
here's their students that are cured.
Yeah.
With quotations around cured.
Absolutely. And then the other I got like a whole list of things that I can go through, but like even like smaller things, right? Like pawn shops weren't allowed to be open on Sundays. And so being able to
that's
like
God's day. So
right.
And the pawn shops,
Liquor
the
stores are
work.
open on
Right.
Sundays at 10 or whatever.
Right. So even being
But
able
not
to
the pawn shop.
being able to repeal that so that way these businesses can have their store open on Sundays.
Well, I don't get it. what's the history? Do you know the history when you have to look at this stuff?
Yeah, so two different things. One, because there was a lot of things that were not mandated to be open on Sundays, like liquor stores back in the day. But then there was also something along the lines of like where someone pawns, jewelry or whatever, then they have to fill out a form. Then LPD has to take it to make sure that it's not stolen. Well, pawn shops are still able to be open on Saturdays, but LPD wasn't able to get to the reports on Mondays. And so it's like, how does adding one more day throw a wrench in your system, right?
Yeah, you just hold on to that item. You don't put it back out to sale right away.
Yeah, and then there's even this like electronic option where people can submit it in electronically, which and so like there was just a lot of reasons why this is the way that things are done. And it's like, well, it's 2024. I wasn't alive when this first got created, so let's change it up because I'm tired of it, and people in the community are tired of it.
James wants to go to pawn shops on Sundays.
Yeah.
I do.
Boy, he wants that choice.
That's right.
Go to pawn shops.
Any other things like that would just be weird?
Yeah. So one was I had a gentleman who reached out who worked at a bar and he wanted to be able to play Keno at his bar, right? He was like a bar. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah. If you're working there and an owner,
you weren't able to play it because they said that the perception was that you were somehow like cheating. And it's like, well, it's like being like live streamed or whatever.
I owned a bar and so
did you really?
I used to. And, I used to just whoever my friends were that were around, like, hey, play Keno for me because I can't play.
Exactly.
I can't get in trouble now. But yeah, it's like there's no way I can't. The ping pong balls are at Big Red Keno.
Right.
Somewhere else.
Right.
Daniel Ocean's texting you the numbers that are
That
going to
would have
come
been
up.
awesome. Yeah. I tell you, it didn't work. They made money off of me. So
it was just like a stupid regulation that made things harder than it needed to be, all because of the perception of stuff, right? And it's like, well, let's change that then. Like, why have something that doesn't make sense on the books?
So that's gotten changed?
It got changed.
Okay.
Chris is
Now
buying a bar.
Now you're going to get another bar, Chris.
Back into the bar. That's why I was out. Like, no Keno.
That's really interesting, James.
One other story that
Yes.
I'll share.
Yes, thank you.
One other story that I'll share didn't involve a change in resolution or ordinances, but the reason why I want to share the story is because I think that a lot of, especially seniors, are at risk to this. I had an individual reach out, or I had her daughter reached out to me and said that her mom was like in her 70s, maybe 80s, was like a cancer patient and got a letter of eviction from a house that she had owned. So she came from Michigan, Minnesota. I can't remember which one specifically, but her daughter got her set up on everything, automated everything, and said, if anyone sends you a letter saying that you owe them something, it's probably a scam. I tell my mom the same thing. If anyone calls you up and says, what's your credit card number? Like, hang up on them, right? Well, she had lived here for about 3 years, and this happened a couple of years ago, so I might have like the details a little off, but like she had lived here for about 3 years, and she had, they assumed that they had a plan set up where her property taxes were getting paid. So she was living off a retirement fund, and this outside company had come in and said, well, we now own your house because we paid off the property tax for the past 3 years. And the family is saying like, we'll pay off the like $15,000 or whatever it is. Like, we have the money. And they were saying like, well, no, we don't. So, got her connected to an attorney, and I was like, look, like, we will do a press conference from the city council chambers. Like, we will do everything we can because like, you cannot,
hear these horror stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, and this still happens. There's a house in Northeast Lincoln where that property got sold for like, I don't want to make this up because I'm going to be off, but like $200 some, maybe $300, because he had a 3-year lien for like mowing the lawn. Right. And so, I mean, this being able to pay off the back property taxes, or being able to pay off the lien, and then to be able to take possession of this house that is worth maybe $100,000 for a couple thousand, and in that case, like a couple hundred. I mean, that's robbery. That's a scam. I want to find a way to change that, and I hope that our state legislators act to change that, because I mean, it's predatory.
Yeah, I hope so too.
That financially ruins people.
Oh, absolutely.
Ruins families. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we like to finish up our podcast with a little segment of what you like to do in this great town of ours, since it is Brand Lincoln. Recreationally, maybe restaurants or any sort of entertainment stuff you like to do.
That's a really good question. So I love hanging out in Havelock. Like, that's my go-to place. Plus I can just, walk home. Havelock, Arnold's and Bob's are great places to hang out. The Isles has great pizza. Soulful.
They got great T-shirts and hats and everything.
Yeah.
We make all their merch.
Do you really?
Yeah, we love Isles. And
Soulful has some really great food also. They're right around the block from.
Not been there yet.
Oh, you need to go check it out. That's where you should do your next podcast. You should bring him in, actually. He's an up-and-comer.
Okay.
I'll get you connected with him.
Perfect.
I'll send you a text. I'll send a text message out. He's a great guy. He has a lot of passion for Northeast Lincoln, and is really trying to solidify his business and to like really be a hub there. Another thing that I like to do, even recreationally, is I love just driving around, right? Like just checking out different parts. I like to do like a little tour of Northeast Lincoln just to make sure that I'm kind of keeping eyes on things. And there's just something kind of freeing about having the windows down, having the radio blaring. You know what I mean?
People are like, that's my councilman just blaring his music.
How often does that happen, James, where you're like getting groceries or you're out to eat and they're like, what's up? How are you?
More often than I would have thought. So I had to do DoorDash for a while. So long story short,
and please take one of my pamphlets for me.
yeah.
It was door to door. So.
Yeah. It saves some time. So after I'd left the school, I needed to make money, right? And so I was doing DoorDash to make ends meet. And I was really surprised about how often people are like, wait a minute, who are you? And, they're like, why are you doing this? I'm like, well, I need money. I got to pay bills. And,
But it makes you real and relatable.
Yeah, I think one of the most ironic things, especially like in times like when I don't have health insurance, like as a therapist, like I can't access the services I provide. You know what I mean? And so, I hear a lot of times people saying like, city council members should be able to, get a wage and be able to have health insurance. And I agree with that, right? Like if we want to be able to have everyday people, then they have to be able to, provide for their families and they have to be able to have access to healthcare. And I would even go further to say like everyone needs to have access to healthcare, right? Like this healthcare being a privilege, not a right, is total bullshit in my mind. And so, it happens more often than I would think. It's really moving when people are like, thank you so much, for everything you do. And I'm like, oh, I'm a hot mess of a person, because I'll be like in Hy-Vee and I'll be wearing like a Power Rangers t-shirt, you know what I mean? And like, sweatpants with like holes in them,
Or like,
getting a DiGiorno pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
I voted for that guy.
And I feel kind of bad because I'm like, oh, God.
I'd vote for a guy in a Power Ranger shirt.
I probably would too.
I'm undercover right now.
Yeah. But it's super humbling, and I'm happy that people are involved, and I hope people continue to be involved and vote because that's how we keep things in order.
So how would people find you, follow you? Maybe if they want to donate or they want to yell at you, or how would they get a hold of you?
No, I appreciate that. So if you Google James Michael Bowers, Lincoln, things will come up. I'm not even sure what my website is anymore. It's probably like Bowers for Lincoln or something like that.
I believe so. I was looking at it earlier.
I haven't updated it in a while. So if my picture, if it's like, I swear that's not my Tinder profile picture. I swear, like it's not like 4 years ago. But yeah, there's
Bowers for Nebraska.
Bowers for Nebraska. Perfect.
.com.
So that's a place where I probably should update the picture on there.
That's what we use for your episode cover.
Perfect. Oh, I also
Or the Power Ranger shirt,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, do that.
I'll send you one of my selfies. I also hold a monthly town hall on the third Thursdays of the month from 5:30 to 6:30 over at Anderson Library, where I give an update on things that the city's working on, and I'll bring in a guest speaker about something that's a hot topic that's going on in the city. So that's kind of like, regardless of email, regardless of phone, like that's always a place that I will be at if people want to come in, find where I'm at and ask me a question.
I bet that's interesting as well.
And you said that's every third Thursday at Anderson Library? 5:30
to 6:30. So I think, tentatively speaking, I think we're going to do our topic on that one on like 33rd and Cornhusker and the construction that's going to be going there.
That they've been talking about for a very long time.
Yes.
So
come on out and learn more information. But yeah, no. And I think those town halls have been in place even since the first Northeast Lincoln person who started them, Marguerite Allschwede, who, and those things have just been a staple since like the 80s. And Northeast Lincoln was like the only one that was doing them for decades. And now it's starting to catch on, which I'm really, really glad about because I think that provides accessibility and, people to get their voice heard.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your life story and everything with us.
Thanks. I feel like I just kind of like rambled a bunch, and
that's what we like.
Welcome to
awesome.
makes me feel better about who's in our seats at City Council. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. Hopefully, whoever splices this to make me sound horrible. I mean, I'm not even talking about you all. I'm talking about whoever uses any of my words for an attack ad later. At least enjoys listening.
We'll have the original, so it'll be fun.
Thanks.
So,
thanks, James.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.